All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition to the Carvel Community Meeting. Today's date is February 14th, 2024. So happy Valentine's Day to all. If you are watching this recording from home, just a reminder, we do meet every second and fourth Wednesday of the month at 8 a.m. Pacific time. It's a good opportunity for you to come and meet the maintainers, other people in the community, ask questions, listen in on what the maintainers are working on, just provide feedback, or you can just sit and listen. We would love to have you and get to know more people in the community. For those that are on the call today and you have something you want to discuss with the team, just a reminder to put that down below in the discussion topic section, and we'll get to it once we get through all the other stuff. If you are unable to join us live and you still have questions or want to get a hold of us, we can be reached in the Carvel Slack channel in the Kubernetes workspace. You can email us. You can find us on GitHub and any of our project repos, or you can find us on X at Carvel_dev. And if at any point you are interacting with us or any other members of the community, we do ask that you please read and abide by our code of conduct, which is linked out through all of our repos. Also a reminder that we do have this pinned issue. It's in all of our repos asking if you're using any of the Carvel tools, provide details on how you're using it and a comment on that issue. It allows for those that are perhaps just getting started with Carvel, understand how to use the tools in different ways and see how other people are using them. It also helps the maintainers understand different use cases and for them to further develop the tools. So we really appreciate participation for adding a comment here. And for anyone who's on the call today, just add your name to the attendees list and any organization you represent below. It's optional, but we would like to keep track of who all is attending the meetings. Moving on to announcements. So we do have a presence in Paris for KubeCon. We have a couple of talks. So we have Project Lightning Talk on March 19th. This is a new opportunity that CNCF is giving the projects. So it's, I think, going to be about a 6-minute lightning talk. We won't know what time we will have until February 26th, so stay tuned for that. And then we also have Project Carvel, composable tools for application management. That's going to be on Friday, March 22nd at 14:55 to 15:30. And the speakers are Daniel Garvier Moreau. I hope I didn't butcher that, but I probably did. And then Salmek, who's one of the maintainers, obviously, you know and love him. So if you are going to KubeCon and you want to, meet Salmek in person, that's a good opportunity. Otherwise, we do have kiosk in the project pavilion. We, as a sandbox project, we only get one time slot in one day. So we are now Thursday, March 21st from 10:30 to 13:30. And if you would like to help out, we just need one extra person to help us out from this time slot, 12:30 to 1:30. So reach out to me in Slack or email us or any of the other opportunities other ways to reach out to us, as I mentioned before. Okay, moving on to content. So we haven't posted a blog post in quite some time, but we did it. We did this week. Thanks to Rohit. We have a blog post called Create Cross-Plane Function to Use YTT for Templating. I encourage you to go read through that. That was posted today. Let us know if you have any feedback or any questions on how to follow along with the posts and yeah. if there's, any feedback you have for that. So moving on to releases, we have kapp-controller 0.50.0. Who is able to give some info on this? Anyone?
Okay, I can go.
Okay, thanks for being.
So there were, I think, a lot of changes in this release, and there were some folks who also made their first contribution. Prem is already here, and Jignasha, and forgot the name, but yeah. So I think the major highlights were there was a bug fix for the service account deletion issue, like when if a package installer and AppCR is installed is present in a namespace, and if we delete the AppCR and then trigger a deletion of the namespace, so the deletion starts, like the deletion of the app resources start, but since the namespace gets deleted, the service account also gets deleted, and it sort of gets paused in between. So this was sort of an edge case, and this was fixed in this release. So now we don't overwrite the details from kapp deployment. So the deletion still goes through for the AppCR, like the fallback still happens. And there, so the second one is basically something that we had added in vendor earlier for skipping SSL verification, and now we have added in kapp-controller as well. So we can do the same thing from kapp-controller now. Third and fourth are I can see the user handle, but I forgot the name. So these are basically some bug fixes. So G Capizzi, they found this issue in kapp-controller and made the fixes as well. So thanks a lot for those. The next one is again from Yash. So this is for having more metrics around like fetch template and deploy times of an app and package install and package repository. And I think there are a couple of them from Somic, which are for making some bits of kapp-control more extensible. And then Madan also contributed in fixing a bug in kapp-control, and also adding signature verification for both KC and KCTR. I think I covered most of them. But if you all have any questions, do let me
know. Well, thanks, Praveen. And thanks, Giuseppe, for your contributions. Really appreciate that. Moving on to secretgen-controller, this seems to be pretty simple. I'm not sure if anyone wants to go over this.
I can just go over it since it's pretty simple, I guess. So we have a couple of bumps to keep like this, keep the CV scanners happy. And we also have the signing and release note changes that we pushed out to the other tools in secretgen-controller now. That's mainly it.
Cool. Thanks, Samik. Okay, moving on to project roadmap stuff. What is going on with the release package repository as tar? Anybody know?
I remember we had some reviews there. Joe, like, do you recall where that's at? I did not.
So I did not have time. I did
Okay.
not have time. I did ask for folks to take a look at that, but in the end, I don't think we ended up finishing the review of the proposal. And I think that in terms of like functionality, the implementation was done, but I'm not 100% sure. I reviewed it, and so yeah, that's where things are on this. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Then the other one, is there any other tools remaining that this needs to be implemented on the attestation for Carvel artifacts? I know that we've been working on getting all the tools with this.
So Tanushree and Madan led this, so like please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think all of the tools and artifacts are now signed. However, we haven't gotten around to the SLAs a bit of it. We haven't gotten around to attestations.
So do you want to do this for the experimental tools? Because we haven't done for those as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure really.
Are we releasing the experimental tools?
No.
Nope.
I think we're
Not
good.
unless someone asked for.
Yeah. Like if we were releasing them, I'd say yes. But if we were releasing them, I'd say yes, it's not a priority right now. But if we're not releasing them, I think it's fine.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, we can still create stories on there, but I'm not sure like what we are going to do there, right? Like because for example, for the Terraform, for example, provider, are you gonna assign it? What are you gonna do there? I don't know. So I'll have to think about it.
Cool. So this one was merged, still need to update the roadmap. The next one, option to skip SSL verification for Git. The notes from last meeting was that it was done in vendor, need to do in kapp-controller. Is that still the case?
This is the one that Yash worked on in this release, so there's stuff.
Oh, sorry, I didn't catch that. Was that it still needs to be done in kapp-controller or it was done?
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
done.
it's done. Yeah, it's in development.
So just need to update the roadmap. Okay, the next one, make kapp-controller extensible. The last notes were waiting for proposal from Joao.
Not to be repetitive, though, no, I didn't do anything. I hadn't had time to build this. So like just so like people understand. So right now we are kind of in a crunch and we're kind of focusing on another proposal that we want to bring forward to the community that is a little bit different, that is kind of unrelated to this one. So but eventually can pave some way for this proposal. So right now we are on the process of writing and creating some POCs for dependency management for kapp-controller, and that kind of has higher priority because it is aligned with Broadcom priorities right now, and that's something that we are actively working on. So the proposal for extending kapp-controller, as of right now, I still haven't started it, but I'm more than happy to have discussions with other folks if they are interested in looking at it and think about ways to make it more extensible and what would be like interesting points of contact that we can do. Like we talked before about eventually having the ability to extend kapp-controller by like, for example, allowing the packaging API, the package author to provide, for example, like the RBAC that they would need, and would have some sort of like another controller that could do that for you, right? Like that could create the RBAC that you need, for example, right? Like, it's like those kinds of examples I think are kind of important. So we'd also like some feedback before we start thinking about like a lot of like extensibility or the things that can be done. Like what are the kinds of examples that we can have on how can we do this? Or like, sorry, not how can we do this, like what are the ideas that we can do, like can implement how can we extend it? Because like there are like different paradigmas, right? Like for example, like you can have like implement something like control plane did, right? Like, and you say like, oh, I want to extend this by creating like a function and have the ability to create functions that would do things for you, right? Or we could just think about like an operator, individual operators that do like different tasks on the packaging API, and then they can collaborate. Or we can say like, no, kapp-controller is like, there's no extensibility, it's like a monolith and just like it has to do everything, right? So we need, if there's like folks that are interested in this area and they have like ideas and so on, just reach out to me and we can talk a little bit about it and see like what are like the best options for us to move forward. But just as a note, like that is not right now on the top of my priorities, because there are other things that are.
Cool. Thank you for that in-depth explanation. But yeah, like Joel said, if you do have ideas and want to help out with this, reach out to him on Slack.
I do have a question regarding the other proposal, since you mentioned dependency management. And if you can't really go into detail on it yet, that's fine too. But what kind of dependency management? Is it of kapp-controller's dependencies itself, or is it like a dependency management in the sense of like when you install a package, also installing its dependencies or something along those lines?
The latter, the second, right? So the idea here is the packaging API is going to be extended in order for a package to inform kapp-controller in this case, what are the packages that it requires to work. And kapp-controller would then, if you want to, if the person that is installing the package wants to install package, they can install like the dependencies as well. So that's more or less like the idea of what we are planning to propose.
Cool. Any other questions? All right. Now moving on to backlog stuff. We got K-control, make local reconciler bits more pluggable.
Oh yeah, I can talk about that. So it's actually something Yore brought up, and I think he's on the call today. I think Yore has been using a part of K-control that's meant to sort of mimic what an app does locally on your host. And Yore here is like consuming parts of that logic in like an external tool. And there are some things we can do to make that easier. So I just thought like I'd call it out that we are thinking about making that change.
Cool. Hi, Jorge.
Hi, Nancy. How are you?
I'm good. Good to see you on here.
Yeah, maybe I can give my part of the context on this.
Sure.
So we use in the project what I'm working on, which is called Educates, a training platform, a learning training platform for hands-on labs on Kubernetes. We were using kapp-controller to deploy specific resources that workshops will need to be deployed along with the content for the application in the cluster, and we were using kapp-controller. The thing is, it really imposed a big dependency on us, and we wanted to look into how to simplify the workflow. Mostly because one of the things that kapp-controller do really great is the periodic reconciliation, right? And for that, kapp-controller is fantastic. But in our use scenario, we don't need that additional periodic reconciliation. We just need to do an initial deployment, whether it succeeds or not. And so for that, we were looking into the dev mode that the K-control CLI has. The problem is that K-control CLI is not made to be consumable as a library. So we were just vendoring some bits and here and there and reusing some of the logic while trying to do like a proof of concept on our side. And while doing that, we found some things that made consumption of K-controller CLI dev mode or local mode and the reconcilers slightly challenging. So we reported back with the hopes that if this is made more consumable as a library and that the reconcilers do eventually support to give more feedback for consumers of the K-control dev as a library, that will be fantastic, and it will probably enhance more people doing similar things that we do, that the K-control or kapp-controller does not currently make simple.
All right. Thank you for providing more context there. Any questions or comments on that? Okay. Moving on to CAP, reviews for pre-flight checks. It's just what, yeah, this is already like what the discussion topics is. So might as well let's dive in.
So I'm not sure who added it to the agenda, but my name is Bryce. I'm from Red Hat, and I'm on one of the teams responsible for helping build the next generation of Operator Lifecycle Manager. So I'm sure some of you folks are familiar with what that is, as we've had some more collaboration recently, and we're looking to build on top of kapp-controller for like managing the actual deployment of manifests. And as part of that, one of the goals that we have with OLM is to make it secure by default, and some of that involves some pre-flight checks around like permission validation, specifically making sure that before anything is attempted to be deployed to the cluster, you have the permission to do all of those things, like deploy all of those resources. That includes preventing privilege escalation when deploying RBAC resources. So things like roles and cluster roles, unless you have certain permissions, you aren't able to perform privilege escalation. And that means you can only create roles or cluster roles that provide resources that are provide the same level of permissions that you already have permission to do. Role bindings and cluster role bindings also have a special privilege escalation thing where you can't reference roles or cluster roles in those bindings unless you have the permissions that those reference as well. And there's specific verbs, escalate and bind, that allow somebody to have the permissions to do that privilege escalation. And so one of the things that Olin wants to do as part of the security by default is make sure that we adhere to all those. And if you have any of those resources within your manifest that you're applying, we perform some kind of pre-flight check to say, yes, you have all the permissions to do this, so go ahead and continue with applying the changes to the cluster. Otherwise, it halts right there and it doesn't actually apply any of the changes. Looking back at some of the agenda docs, I'd noticed that like more generic pre-flight checks was in the conversation as well. So this title in this the PR description hasn't been properly updated yet, as I still have it kind of in a draft mode and playing around some things. But I did add a more generic pre-flight flag and moved the validate permissions flag into a pre-flight check. And so if folks are familiar with how feature gates work with the feature gates package in Kubernetes, you pass in like this -- feature gates flag, and then you have a comma separated list of all the feature gates and whether or not you're enabling them with a Boolean value like true, false. I took a similar sort of approach. It's not as complex of an implementation because right now it doesn't have any sort of semantic grouping around like alpha, beta, things like that, but that could always be added in the future. And so I'm also working on adding end-to-end tests and stuff. I have the changes locally. I just haven't pushed them up yet. But that's essentially what this PR does, is it adds a generic pre-flight check thing where you can register new pre-flight checks, and it includes registering an initial pre-flight check that's disabled by default for doing permission validation, capturing all the things that I had mentioned previously.
Thanks for that, Bryce. And I'm the one who put it in the discussion topic. So I guess I think your description actually answered a lot of my questions. So firstly, thanks for setting up it in a way where we can have like more pre-flight checks eventually. That's really cool. And so I was mainly a bit doubtful about why we need to chain multiple validators, but like, are the other validators other than like the self-subject access review, are they just related to whether or not a user can bind permissions for themselves in cluster roles and roles?
Yeah, so the whole that dives a little bit more into like the implementation details, and the reason why I did that was because the individual validators allows us to specifically validate based on the resource type. And so not all resources have those special rules. So I wanted to create one that was like more generic and just like checks, do you have the permission to do these things for that resource? And typically that comes down to, I think for kapp, you're either creating, updating, or deleting resources. And I think you get list as well. So, but I think that get list happens before any attempts to make any changes. So if you don't have the get list permissions, kapp will tell you, hey, you don't have a permission to like get or list these resources, so we can't do anything with this. So that leaves the basic validator for any resource that isn't super specific logic. We can easily use self-subject access review. I think I have a work in progress piece there to investigate self-subject rules review, which might present a larger overall picture of all your permissions, and we can do validation there rather than a bunch of different API calls to the self-subject access review requests. And so that basic validator will validate anything that doesn't have like a unique validation method. And then there's a role validator and a binding validator that allows us to like more succinctly break out the specific validation logic for each of those resources. And I think that just makes it easier to have a logical separation between what the modes of validation are for each of those resources. And I tried to make the validators set up in such a way that we can have like a composite one that can group everything together, and you can kind of filter what validator you use based on, I think I did the group version kind, maybe the group version resource. I don't 100% remember off the top of my head, but makes it a little bit easier for when a resource comes in, we can say, hey, let's go and use this validator. If it's one of these other resources, let's make sure we do the specific validation for that resource.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks for the explanation. So I guess Praveen has already dropped some comments. I'm gonna take a closer look as well. And thanks for the PR.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. And some of the I don't know if we wanted to discuss any of the specifics of any of these comments already, or if we wanted to save those for in the PR.
I think PR is fine. Like most of my comments are like, I think some of them are answers to your questions that you left as rules, and I think you already answered 2 of my other questions, so I'm good.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone for being open to this change and taking a look.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Bryce. Any questions or comments on this outside of those who've already spoken?
Yes, I haven't looked at the pull request obviously, but I just wanted to know if you are doing the pre-flight checks on the like a huge amount of resources. The feedback that you get is all the RBAC failures for all those resources. Yes.
Yeah. So it should return all the failures for it should return an aggregate of all the errors, if I remember correctly, the implementation I did. I've been doing this slowly over the course of a few weeks, so some of the things I have to go back and remind myself of, but
cool. And the second question is the output that for the validation errors that you are getting something that can be then later used to create or work on those, on fixing the RBAC, like in an easy way, or you need to do a lot of translation between the output that you are giving in the tool and then fixing the RBAC rules that you are going to be providing for the specific service account?
Yeah, so I don't think that there's any logic in there to be like, hey, go create this exact role. But all the errors in validation should go based on the resources that you're trying to create. So for example, if you're trying to create like a pod, it'll go through the basic validator, and it'll say like, hey, you're missing create or update permissions on this. So you need to request either whatever your process is to get those permissions. You need to go through that process, and it'll tell you the exact permissions that you're missing. And the same goes for like the role and binding validator. It'll go through, and for the roles, if you're trying to create a role and you're missing the permissions to create certain things, it'll say, hey, you can't create a role because you're missing this set of permissions that your role says that you need. And then you can go through the same process. Same thing for the role and cluster role bindings as well. And I think it is the first validation error that gets hit. So like the first resource with validation errors is what's returned, but that error should contain all the aggregate information of like what permissions you're missing. Could definitely update the validator logic to go through all the resources and then return an aggregate of that as well.
Yeah, I think that the latter will be nice, because otherwise you will need to maybe run the tool multiple times until you figure out everything that's missing. And then as a comment, I just wanted to say this is pretty exciting, because one of the things that personally I'm not a real fan of, especially in kapp-controller, is that typically, because it is complicated sometimes to work on the specific RBAC that you need, we as users of or creator of packages, we typically just give a cluster admin, which is the easiest one, and that is probably something we should start fixing ourselves as creator of content. Nice, thank you.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that is also helpful in this PR is that it adds the generic pre-flight check stuff, because I don't know in terms of kapp-controller, if this is something that folks are interested in being added there. One of the other things that we're talking about on the OLM side of things is because OLM is going to be more opinionated on operators specifically. So the expectation that there's going to be things like CRDs and stuff. One of the other pre-flight checks that we're considering with that is having like CRD validate, like upgrade validation. So if you're going to be attempting to upgrade a customer resource definition, making sure that it goes through a set of pre-flight checks to verify that like you're not going to intentionally cause data loss or anything like that when doing one of those upgrades. So that's another, like, because there's this generic pre-flight check method, the changes would have to go into kapp, but nothing would prevent us from like having our own fork of kapp and adding the pre-flight check if we needed to. If you guys are open to having that functionality added, like that's also something we could come up to this community and add that, and that could be another pre-flight check that goes into kapp in the future.
Okay. Great discussion on this. Any other comments or questions?
I mentioned it in the chat, but I think it's right now it will throw the first error not aggregated.
Yeah, Bryce
Which
had
is fine
mentioned
for
that.
starters, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it should be pretty straightforward to make it an aggregate.
Yeah.
And so I can throw that change in there shortly. But like I said, I've got a couple other things that are cutting a draft. I guess one question that I do have for folks is there was a comment on the PR from another person on the OLM side of the fence, Joe, around using self-subject rules review instead of self-subject access review. Is that something that folks feel we should pursue in this PR, or would that be better suited for, let's go ahead and get this change in with self-subject access review, and then we can kind of figure out the underlying implementation in the future if we want some optimization there? Is there any opinions on that, or if not, that's totally cool too.
I think we can go ahead with access review for now, because we are going this by default off. So there's like if someone wants, they can enable it, and they would know what are the consequences of using access review. So I think this is fine for now, and later on we can move towards rules review.
Cool. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? All right, this is all super cool to see. Yeah, thanks, Brian, or Bryce. I'm from Brian, and so when I see the BRY, it's like automatically Brian. Thanks, Bryce, for all your work in this, and then your in-depth explanation for everything. And it happens all the time. So if anyone's watching this from home and you too have feedback you want to give to this, feel free to drop some comments into this PR. Otherwise, you can find us on Slack as well, or you can join us at the next community meeting. Like I said, we meet every second and fourth Wednesday of the month at 8 a.m. Pacific time. We would love to see some new faces and meet more people in the community. So I encourage you to come join us. Otherwise, you know where to find us if you have any other questions. Thank you everyone who joined us today and added their thoughts on what we're working on. Super helpful for everybody. So thank you and have a good rest of your day or evening wherever you are.